The prison yard was silent long before dawn. No shouting, no footsteps, just the cold hum of fluorescent lights waiting to witness a woman's final moments. Death row inmate Elena Reyes walked with her hands cuffed, her face calm, too calm for someone who had only hours left to live. Guards whispered that she hadn't cried once. Not during trial, not during sentencing, not even now on the morning of her execution. But everything changed when she stopped at the doorway of the chaplain's room and spoke 7 words no one expected. "I want to see the Virgin Mary." The guards froze. The wardens scoffed. Even the chaplain didn't know what to say. Death row inmates ask for last meals, last phone calls, last prayers, but no one asks for a miracle. Yet Elena's eyes weren't desperate. They were focused, determined, as if she already knew something the rest of the world didn't. They allowed her inside the dim chapel, thinking she just wanted a moment of peace. But what happened in that room made hardened guards drop to their knees, the warden run for help, and the entire prison question what they believed in. Some say the lights flickered, some say they heard footsteps, and some swear Elena wasn't alone in that room. Stay with me until the end, because what happened in that chapel before the execution shocked every guard, every inmate, and changed the prison forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Elena Maria Reyes wasn't supposed to be on death row. At least that's what everyone who knew her before would tell you. She was the kind of woman who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends, who brought homemade soup to elderly neighbors, who never missed Sunday Mass at St. Catherine's Catholic Church. But life has a way of breaking even the gentlest souls. It started 3 years earlier on a Tuesday evening in March. Elena was driving home from her job at the community center, where she taught literacy classes to immigrants. The rain was coming down hard that night, making the streets slick and dangerous. She never saw the car that ran the red light. The impact sent her vehicle spinning across the intersection. When Elena finally opened her eyes, she was hanging upside down, blood dripping from a gash on her forehead. Her left arm twisted at an unnatural angle. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing the other car, crumpled against a telephone pole, and knowing that inside was a family, a mother, a father, and their 8-year-old daughter returning from a school play. Elena survived. They didn't. The investigation that followed tore her life apart piece by piece. Traffic cameras were broken. Witnesses gave conflicting stories. The other driver's blood alcohol level was never properly tested due to a lab error. But Elena had been taking prescription medication for chronic pain, medication that could cause drowsiness. That was enough for the prosecutor. Elena, they said, had fallen asleep at the wheel and caused the accident that killed 3 innocent people. She maintained her innocence through every court hearing, every appeal, every sleepless night in her cell. But the evidence, circumstantial as it was, painted a picture the jury couldn't ignore. Guilty on 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter. The judge, a stern man named Harold Morrison, who had seen too many tragedies in his courtroom, looked down at Elena with what might have been pity. Given the severity of this crime and the loss of 3 precious lives, including that of an innocent child, I sentence you to death by lethal injection. Elena's mother collapsed in the gallery. Her sister screamed, but Elena herself stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, her lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of appeals that went nowhere. 2 years of lawyers who gradually stopped returning phone calls. 2 years of watching other inmates receive visitors while Elena sat alone in her cell, reading the same worn Bible her grandmother had given her when she was 12. The other women on death row whispered about Elena. She was different from them. She didn't rage against the guards or pick fights with other inmates. She didn't spend her days plotting revenge or drowning in self-pity. Instead, Elena spent her time in quiet reflection. She wrote letters to the families of the victims, letters that were never answered but never stopped coming. She prayed the rosary every morning and every evening, She helped other inmates write letters to their own families, teaching them to read when they couldn't. Even the guards began to notice something unusual about her. Officer Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the prison system, later said he had never encountered an inmate quite like Elena. She thanked him every morning when he brought her breakfast. She asked about his children by name. She never complained, never demanded special treatment, never caused trouble. It was almost like she was preparing for something, Martinez would later tell reporters. Like she knew something we didn't. As Elena's execution date approached, the prison staff expected her to break down. They had seen it countless times before. The tough ones who swaggered through their appeals, suddenly becoming terrified children when reality set in. The quiet ones who exploded into rage and desperation. But Elena remained serene. She declined her last meal, saying she preferred to fast. She refused the offer to call family members, explaining that she had already said her goodbyes in letters. She even turned down the traditional meeting with the prison chaplain. This puzzled Father Mackenzie, who had counseled hundreds of condemned inmates over his 15 years at the facility. Usually, even the most hardened criminals want some kind of spiritual comfort in their final hours, he explained to the warden. But Elena, she just smiled and said she was already prepared. The night before her scheduled execution, Elena made an unusual request. She asked for a photograph of the Virgin Mary, specifically the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe that hung in the prison chapel. The request seemed harmless enough. The guards brought her a small, framed picture from the chaplain's office. Elena held the photograph gently in her hands, studying the serene face of Mary with an intensity that made the guards uncomfortable. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll see you soon." At the time, they thought she was talking to them. They were wrong. As dawn approached on the morning of Elena's execution, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The prison staff went through their usual routine, but there was tension in the air that none of them could explain. The chaplain arrived early, expecting Elena to change her mind about spiritual counsel. The warden reviewed the protocols one final time. The medical staff prepared their equipment with clinical precision, but none of them were prepared for what Elena was about to ask. When Elena spoke those 7 words, the silence in the corridor became deafening. The guards exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to such an unprecedented request. Warden Thompson, a man who had overseen 43 executions in his career, stepped forward with a frown creasing his weathered face. "Ma'am, we can arrange for Father Mackenzie to visit you one more time if you'd like, or we can provide you with religious materials. But I'm not sure what you mean by seeing the Virgin Mary." Elena's voice was steady, almost peaceful. "There's a statue in your chapel, Our Lady of Guadalupe. I've seen it through the doorway when they've taken me past. That's all I'm asking for. 5 minutes." The request hung in the air like smoke. Protocol didn't cover this. There was no manual entry for an inmate wanting to visit a religious statue minutes before execution. Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "Warden, it's highly irregular. Everything about today feels irregular," Thompson muttered under his breath. He looked at Elena again, studying her face for any sign of manipulation or desperation. Instead, he found something that unsettled him more than any rage or pleading could have: complete peace. 5 minutes, he finally said, with full escort. The walk to the chapel felt eternal. Elena's shackles clinked softly against the polished concrete floors. 4 guards surrounded her, their boots creating an echo that seemed to bounce off every wall in the facility. Other inmates pressed their faces against cell windows, watching the procession with curiosity and dread. They all knew what day it was. They all knew where Elena was headed after this unusual detour. The chapel door creaked open, revealing a simple room with wooden pews arranged in neat rows. At the front, behind a modest altar, stood the statue Elena had requested to see. Our Lady of Guadalupe rose 3 feet from its marble base, her painted robes flowing in eternal stillness. Her face was serene, her hands extended in a gesture of welcome and blessing. The statue had been donated by a guard's family 20 years earlier, after his son survived a car accident. Elena moved forward slowly, her chains allowing only small steps. When she reached the front pew, she stopped and looked up at the statue. "Ma'am, your 5 minutes starts now," Officer Martinez announced, checking his watch. But Elena didn't seem to hear him. She was completely focused on the image before her, as if she were having a conversation no one else could witness. The guards positioned themselves around the room, maintaining their professional vigilance while trying not to stare at the condemned woman's final moments of devotion. What happened next would be debated for years afterward. Officer Rodriguez, stationed near the door, later swore he felt a sudden drop in temperature. Not gradual, but instant, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Officer Martinez noticed it too, along with something else. The fluorescent lights above began to flicker, creating an unsteady rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. But Elena remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the statue. Then she began to speak, so softly that the guards had to strain to hear her words. "I know you've been with me," she whispered, "through the trial, through the appeals, through every night in that cell. You never left me alone, did you?" The flickering lights steadied for a moment, as if responding to her voice. Elena continued, her tone growing stronger. "They think I killed those people. They think I'm a murderer, but you know the truth. You've always known." Officer Martinez felt something he couldn't explain, a presence in the room that hadn't been there moments before. He glanced at his fellow guards and saw his own confusion reflected in their faces. "I'm not afraid anymore," Elena said. And for the first time since entering the chapel, she smiled. "Because I know what really happened that night, and I know why you brought me here." The temperature in the room continued to drop. Officer Rodriguez pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders, wondering if the heating system had malfunctioned. Elena raised her shackled hands as high as the chains would allow, her palms facing upward in a gesture of surrender and acceptance. "If this is how my story ends," she said, her voice now carrying through the entire chapel, "then I trust you completely. But if there's another way, if there's something you want me to know, please show me." That's when the impossible happened. The statue began to glow, not with artificial light or reflected illumination, but with something that seemed to emanate from within the painted plaster itself, a soft, golden radiance that grew brighter with each passing second. Officer Martinez rubbed his eyes, certain he was experiencing some kind of hallucination brought on by stress or lack of sleep. But when he looked again, the glow was still there, and it was spreading. Officer Rodriguez took a step backward, his hand instinctively moving to his radio, but he found himself unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything except watch in stunned silence. The third guard, Officer Kowalski, dropped to one knee without conscious thought. Later, he would say it felt like something was pulling him down, not with force, but with an overwhelming sense of reverence he had never experienced before. But the most extraordinary change was in Elena herself. Her face, which had been marked by 2 years of confinement and stress, suddenly appeared radiant. The lines of worry disappeared. The pallor of prison life was replaced by a healthy glow that seemed to mirror the light emanating from the statue. And then, as clearly as if someone had spoken directly into each guard's ear, they heard words that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "She is innocent." The voice was female, warm, and carried with it an authority that left no room for doubt. It didn't come from Elena, who was still kneeling with her hands raised. It didn't come from anywhere in the room they could identify. It simply was. Officer Martinez later told investigators that those 2 words contained more certainty than any verdict he had ever heard in a courtroom. It wasn't an opinion or a hope or a desperate plea. It was truth, spoken with divine authority. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a burden finally being lifted after 2 long years. "Thank you," she whispered to the statue. "Thank you for not letting me die with this lie." The golden light began to pulse gently, creating shadows that danced across the chapel walls in patterns that seemed almost like writing in a language none of them could read, but all of them somehow understood. And in that moment, each person in the room knew with absolute certainty that they were witnessing something that would change everything. But the miracle was only beginning. Only beginning. The golden light pulsed 3 more times, each wave stronger than the last. Officer Martinez felt his knees buckle as an overwhelming sense of peace washed over him. He had seen miracles before in his grandmother's stories, but witnessing one was something entirely different. Elena remained perfectly still, her face turned upward toward the statue. The tears on her cheeks caught the supernatural light, creating tiny prisms that scattered rainbow reflections across the chapel walls. Then the statue began to move. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures that would shatter the plaster. Instead, Our Lady of Guadalupe's painted eyes slowly shifted downward, meeting Elena's gaze directly. Her stone lips, which had been carved in eternal silence, parted slightly as if preparing to speak. Officer Rodriguez stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the chapel wall with a loud thud. The sound echoed through the room, but none of the other guards moved. They were transfixed, watching something that defied every law of physics and reason they had ever known. "Elena," came a voice so gentle it felt like a mother's whisper. "My precious daughter." This time there was no mistaking where the voice originated. It came from the statue itself, from lips that moved with impossible life. Elena's body began to tremble, not with fear, but with an overwhelming surge of emotion. "You know my name," she whispered back. "I have always known your name. I was with you in the rain that night. I saw what really happened." Officer Kowalski, still on his knees, felt compelled to reach for his radio. Protocol demanded he report this immediately, but when he tried to move his hand, he found it frozen in place, not by force but by a profound understanding that this moment was sacred beyond any earthly authority. The statue's eyes seemed to encompass not just Elena, but every person in the room. When that gaze fell on Officer Martinez, he felt as if every mistake he had ever made, every harsh word he had spoken, every moment of doubt was being seen and forgiven simultaneously. "The other driver," the voice continued, speaking to Elena but loud enough for all to hear, "was intoxicated far beyond what the tests showed. The evidence was tampered with. Money changed hands. Justice was bought and sold while truth was buried." Elena's chains suddenly felt lighter around her wrists. She looked down and gasped. The metal shackles hadn't opened, but somehow they no longer seemed to restrict her movement. "You never fell asleep," the voice said with absolute authority. "You swerved to avoid the collision, not to cause it. You tried to save them." Officer Rodriguez found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "This isn't possible. Statues don't talk. They don't move." The painted eyes of Our Lady turned toward him with infinite compassion. "Officer Rodriguez, you have 3 daughters, Maria, Sophia, and little Carmen, who just turned 6. You pray for their safety every night before your shift." Rodriguez's face went white. He had never mentioned his daughters' names to anyone at the prison. He had never even brought their pictures to work, keeping his family life completely separate from his job. "How could you know that?" he stammered. "Because I hear every prayer, my son. Just as I heard Elena's prayers every night in her cell. Just as I have been preparing this moment for 2 years." The golden light began to expand, no longer confined to just the statue. It spread across the altar, illuminating the simple wooden cross and the worn Bible that Father Mackenzie left there. It crept along the walls, chasing away shadows that seemed to flee its presence. Elena stood slowly, her movements fluid despite the chains. "What happens now?" she asked. "They're still going to execute me in 30 minutes. The appeals are exhausted. No one will believe what happened here." The statue's expression changed, becoming more determined. "Truth has a way of revealing itself when heaven intervenes, my daughter. But first, you must forgive." "Forgive who?" "Everyone. The prosecutor who built his case on lies. The judge who sentenced you, the witnesses who stayed silent, the system that failed you, and most importantly, yourself for all the guilt you've carried. Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something fundamental had shifted in her expression. The last traces of bitterness and desperation were gone, replaced by a serenity that seemed to radiate from within. "I forgive them all," she said simply. "I release every grudge, every moment of anger, every wish for revenge. I am free." The moment those words left her lips, the chapel door burst open. Warden Thompson stood in the doorway, his face flushed and his breathing heavy as if he had been running. Behind him stood Father Mackenzie, a court reporter, and someone Elena didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. "Elena," the warden called out, his voice cracking with emotion, "you need to come with us right now." But he stopped mid-sentence when he saw the scene before him. The golden light was unmistakable, even to someone who had spent his career dealing in cold facts and harsh realities. The statue seemed to pulse with life, and the air itself felt charged with something beyond human understanding. "Dear God," Father Mackenzie whispered, dropping to his knees just inside the doorway. "It's really happening." The woman with the briefcase stepped forward, seemingly unaffected by the supernatural atmosphere. "Ms. Reyes, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm an investigative journalist with the State Attorney General's office. 20 minutes ago, a man named Detective James Morrison came forward with evidence that completely exonerates you." Elena turned slowly, the golden light still playing across her face. "Morrison? Judge Morrison's son. He's been investigating your case for 2 years. Convinced his father made a mistake. He found the real toxicology reports that were hidden, located witnesses who were paid to stay silent, uncovered financial records showing bribes to key officials." Officer Martinez felt his legs give out completely. He slumped against the wall, staring at Elena with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "She knew," he whispered. "Somehow she knew this was going to happen." Sarah Chen continued, her professional composure beginning to crack as she took in the impossible scene around her. "The governor has issued an emergency stay of execution. You're going to be released, Ms. Reyes. All charges are being dropped." Elena looked back at the statue, whose painted face had returned to its original serene expression. The golden light was fading gradually, but the sense of presence remained strong. "Thank you," she whispered to Our Lady of Guadalupe, "for everything." The statue's lips moved one final time, speaking words that only Elena could hear. "Your real work begins now, my daughter. There are others who need what you have learned." As the supernatural light disappeared completely, Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not just relief or vindication, but purpose, a calling that went far beyond her own freedom. She turned to face the group in the doorway, her chains finally feeling like what they truly were, empty metal that had no power over her spirit. "I'm ready," she said simply. But as they prepared to escort Elena from the chapel, Officer Rodriguez noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. At the base of the statue, where there had been nothing before, lay a single white rose, fresh, perfect, and impossible. The scent filled the entire chapel, sweet and pure, like the promise of new beginnings. Elena smiled, knowing that some miracles leave evidence behind, and some mysteries are meant to change hearts rather than convince minds. Her journey was far from over. It was just beginning. As Elena walked through the prison corridors one final time, she carried with her more than just her freedom. She carried a story that would challenge everything people believed about justice, faith, and the power of divine intervention. The news of her exoneration spread through the facility like wildfire. Inmates pressed against their cell bars, watching in stunned silence as Elena passed by. No longer in shackles, no longer condemned. Some called out her name. Others simply stared, trying to process what they were witnessing. But it was the guards who were most profoundly affected. These were men and women who had built their careers on cold facts, concrete evidence, and unshakable protocol. They dealt in black and white, guilty and innocent, punishment, and justice. What they had witnessed in the chapel shattered those certainties completely. Officer Martinez walked beside Elena as they made their way toward the exit, his mind still reeling from everything he had seen. 20 years of service, thousands of inmates processed through the system, and nothing had prepared him for this moment. "Elena," he said quietly, using her first name for the first time since she had arrived at the facility. "What you experienced in there, what we all witnessed, how do you explain something like that?" Elena smiled gently, her eyes still carrying traces of the peace that had settled over her in the chapel. "I don't think we're meant to explain miracles, Officer Martinez. I think we're meant to be changed by them." The administrative office buzzed with activity as paperwork was rushed through at unprecedented speed. Sarah Chen coordinated with state officials while Father Mackenzie sat in stunned silence, repeatedly glancing toward the chapel as if expecting to see golden light spilling from beneath the door. Warden Thompson reviewed the exoneration documents with shaking hands. In 37 years of prison administration, he had overseen the release of inmates whose convictions were overturned. But this was different. This wasn't just about legal technicalities or new evidence. This was about something that challenged the very foundations of how he understood the world. "The media is already gathering outside," Sarah Chen informed the group. "This story is going to be massive. A death row inmate exonerated minutes before execution after claiming to see the Virgin Mary? Every news outlet in the country will want to interview you." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "And what about Detective Morrison? Judge Morrison's son? I'd like to meet him." "He's waiting outside," Sarah replied. "He said he needed to see this through personally. 26 months of investigation, and he finally found the courage to come forward today of all days." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The son of the judge who had sentenced Elena to death was the one who ultimately proved her innocence. But Elena felt no satisfaction in the vindication, only gratitude for the truth finally being revealed. As they prepared to leave the administrative building, Father Mackenzie approached Elena with reverence in his eyes. "My child," he said softly, "in 40 years of ministry, I have prayed for miracles but never witnessed one so clearly. What happened in that chapel, what I saw with my own eyes, it has strengthened my faith in ways I cannot describe." Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Father, you've been serving God faithfully for decades. Today, God simply chose to serve you back by letting you see His love in action." The priest's eyes filled with tears. "Will you tell me more about what you experienced? The conversation you had with Our Lady? I feel called to document this, to share it with others who need hope." "When I'm ready," Elena promised. "Right now, I just want to step outside and feel the sun on my face as a free woman." The prison gates opened slowly, revealing a crowd of reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers who had gathered after news of the dramatic last-minute exoneration leaked out. Bright lights flashed as Elena emerged, temporarily blinding her after 2 years of dim prison corridors. But standing apart from the media chaos was a man in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that carried the weight of deep regret. Detective James Morrison stepped forward as Elena approached. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so deeply sorry for what my father put you through, for what the entire system put you through. I should have spoken up sooner." Elena studied his face, seeing pain and guilt etched in every line. "Detective Morrison, you risked your career and your relationship with your family to find the truth. You could have stayed silent. Instead, you chose justice over comfort. That takes tremendous courage. But 2 years too late," he replied, shaking his head. "You spent 2 years on death row for a crime you didn't commit because I was afraid to challenge my own father. And yet here we are," Elena said gently, "at exactly the right moment. Not a minute too early, not a minute too late. Sometimes God's timing doesn't match our understanding, but it's always perfect." The reporters surged forward with questions, but Elena raised her hand for silence. The crowd quieted, sensing something significant was about to happen. 2 years ago, I was convicted of a crime I didn't commit. She began, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. I was sentenced to death for the tragic accident that took 3 innocent lives. For 24 months, I lived with the knowledge that I would die for something I didn't do. She paused, looking back at the prison walls that had confined her, but had ultimately become the place of her greatest spiritual awakening. But today, I stand before you not as a victim of injustice, but as a witness to something far more powerful than any human system. I stand here because truth has a voice that cannot be silenced forever, because love is stronger than lies, because sometimes, when we think all hope is lost, that's exactly when miracles happen. A reporter called out from the crowd, "Elena, sources inside the prison are saying you claimed to see the Virgin Mary just before your exoneration was announced. Can you tell us about that?" Elena looked toward the chapel window, where she could swear she still saw a faint golden glow. "I can tell you that I was never alone in that cell, even when I felt most abandoned. I can tell you that prayers are always heard, even when the answers come in ways we never expected. And I can tell you that what happened in that chapel today changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed it." Another reporter pressed forward. "Are you saying you actually saw a vision? That the Virgin Mary appeared to you?" Elena smiled with the same serene expression she had worn throughout her ordeal. "I'm saying that sometimes the divine breaks through into our world in ways that cannot be explained, only experienced. And when it does, it transforms everything it touches." Officer Martinez, who had followed Elena outside, stepped forward unexpectedly. His voice shook as he addressed the crowd. "I've worked in corrections for 20 years, he announced. "I've seen every kind of inmate you can imagine. Violent criminals, con artists, people who would lie to save their own skin. Elena Reyes is different. In 2 years, she never complained, never caused trouble, never lost hope. And today, in that chapel, I witnessed something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I saw a statue come to life. I heard a voice speak truth with authority no earthly court could match. I felt a presence in that room that was pure love, and I watched as heaven itself intervened to prevent the execution of an innocent woman." The crowd slowly dispersed as Elena walked away from the prison gates for the last time. But her story was just beginning to spread across the world. Within hours, news outlets from every continent were reporting the miraculous events at the state penitentiary. Officer Martinez never returned to his post the same man. He requested a transfer to the prison chapel, where he now helps coordinate religious services for inmates. Every morning, he places a fresh white rose at the base of the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and every morning, he remembers the day heaven touched earth. Officer Rodriguez began attending Mass regularly for the first time since his childhood, bringing his 3 daughters with him every Sunday. When little Carmen asks him why he prays so much now, he simply tells her that he learned miracles are real and that changes everything. Detective Morrison reconciled with his father before the judge passed away 6 months later. Their final conversation was about truth, justice, and the courage to admit when we're wrong. Judge Morrison's last words to his son were, "Thank you for being braver than I ever was." Elena established a foundation to help wrongfully convicted inmates, but more than legal aid, she offers something far more powerful: hope. She visits prisons across the country, sharing her story and reminding those who have lost everything that they are never truly alone. The chapel at the state penitentiary became an unofficial pilgrimage site. Inmates, guards, and visitors from around the world come to pray before the statue that once moved, that once spoke, that once proved that love is stronger than any human system of justice. But perhaps the most profound change happened in the hearts of those who witnessed the impossible that morning. Because when you see a miracle with your own eyes, when you watch heaven intervene in the darkest of circumstances, you can never again believe that hope is foolish or that prayer is powerless. Elena's story reminds us that sometimes, when we're facing our darkest hour, when all human help has failed and all earthly doors have closed, that's exactly when divine intervention steps in. Not always in the way we expect, not always when we demand it, but always at the perfect moment. And sometimes, just sometimes, the Virgin Mary still visits those who need her most, bringing light into the deepest darkness, and proving that no prayer goes unheard, no innocent soul goes unprotected, and no miracle is too great for a mother's love. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to know that miracles still happen. Subscribe for more incredible true stories of faith, and remember that even in your darkest moments, you are never walking alone.